أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're all well. And we say a warm welcome to Masjied Boorhaanol Islam, to all the listeners on Radio 786. Alhamdulillah, we're glad to have you here. We continue with our series on the Islamic spirit of revival. And this is part 2 of yesterday's lecture. We were talking about the fall of Jerusalem, the beginning of the Crusades. And this coincides with the life of Imam Ghazali. And so we're almost running 2 parallel stories, and we'll jump between the 2 as we go along this evening. And just to give a bit of backstory, we said yesterday that the Ummah really was in a difficult, desperate state. And the Grand Vizier, a man called Nizam al-Mulk, the man who's in charge of really bringing stability, a man who's really in charge of having to bring bureaucracy and have a plan for the Ummah, is in control of Baghdad. He is in charge of the government of the Ummah. And there are many areas, particularly theological deviancies, heresies, that he wants to fix. And his grand strategy for Islam, to revive Islam, is to develop what is called the Nizamiya system. Nizamiyas are universities. He's going to establish a university in every major city. They will have students living there. This is the first university where you have students living there for free. They're being paid a stipend to live there. And he will try and he gathers the best teachers in the world to teach at the Nizamiya. This is his plan. And the 2 major areas that are causing theological threats to Islam is the rise of Neoplatonism or philosophy, and we'll talk more about this inshallah later on in this evening, and of course the rise of Batiniya Ismailism, a belief that the Quran has a hidden meaning and only some supernatural infallible imam has the right to interpret the Quran. And modern and rather orthodox Islam that people grew up with, or people knew, was becoming irrelevant. So Nizam al-Mulk is trying to solve this problem. And he establishes the biggest Nizamiya in Baghdad, which is the capital. And he needs the right dean, the right chancellor to run this Nizamiya, who is going to be able to teach a whole generation of people about Orthodox Islam. He's going to have to re-establish Orthodox Islam, and he has to take on all these different divergent views in a manner which really leaves no room for doubt, without causing chaos. And when he consulted the scholars, and they said there is this rising young man in Persia, he's just basically finishing his doctorate studies, if you will, in our area. He's already authoring books. His name is Al-Ghazali. His name is Muhammad Al-Ghazali. Nizam al-Mulk met him and said, this is the right man for the job. So let's talk a little bit about who this man, Imam Ghazali, is. Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, is undoubtedly unanimously agreed as the Mujaddid of the century. The scholars have all agreed that, as we said, we spoke about this concept of Mujaddid, where the Prophet said every 100 years a person will come who will revive the deen. And many different scholars are postulated as who are the Mujaddids of each century. As for the 5th century, it is almost unanimously agreed that Imam Ghazali rahimahullah is the Mujaddid of that century. He was a jurist, he was a philosopher, he's a mystic, he is the most written Islamic scholar in Europe. So if you take of any scholar who had the most books translated and spoken about and had the most impact on Western theology or Western philosophy, it is this man, Imam al-Ghazali. And he shaped, I said, a whole generation of Muslim scholars and thinkers, and he begins sort of a Reformation movement. He, of course, his great legacy is bringing Orthodox Islam back into mainstream and to defend it against deviancies and heresies. So how did he start? Started, subhanAllah, from a tiny unknown village, Tus, in the middle of Persia, from a very poor family. We don't know much about his mom. Perhaps his mom passed away when he was young. His dad was a ghazala, meaning a spin. He used to spin wool. It's a very menial job. And his dad was not a very educated man, but deeply loved the scholars, deeply loved the ulama. And so you can imagine this man in our terms, he's always with the imams and the shuyukh, but he's just in the dhikr jama'ah, he's just around the centers of learning, but never felt he was good enough to really go into learning. And he imprinted on his young sons, he has 2 sons, Muhammad and Ahmad. Ahmad is the older one, Imam Ghazali is Muhammad. He wanted one of you please become shuyukh, one of you must become a sheikh one day. And as Allah would decree, the father Imam Ghazali would die when Imam Ghazali was only 6 or 7. And before he passed away, he asked a teacher, look after my sons. This is all the inheritance I have. I give it to you. Spend it on their education. And so Imam Ghazali is raised by this a teacher for a few years, and then the money runs out. Now remember, I mentioned Nizam al-Mulk established these new madrasas where people can go and live and learn, and there was this new madrasa where they're accepting students, and it was a place to live. So Imam Ghazali says, my brother and I initially went to go learn Islam, not for Islam, but just a place to live, a plate of food. We went to go join the madrasa, and that's how he joins the Nizamiyya, and he starts learning and studying there. And of course, once he enrolls in his classes, it becomes quite clear that he's an exceptional student. And he's really a genius in the way he thinks, the way he can memorize, and the way he can grasp concepts. And he becomes devoted into his learning and excelling in his academic pursuits. He became a bit of a teenager. There's a story of him traveling, and he would always keep his books with him. So he loved learning, he loved knowledge and pursuit of knowledge. He would even travel with his books. And the caravan that he was with got hijacked or got robbed, and the bandits took everything, including his books. And Imam Ghazali, runs after the bandits, not worrying about his life, and he says, please, you can take everything, but I've spent years those are my notes. I mean, I went from Sheikh to compile my notes. That's all the knowledge I have. If you take it away, that's like my lifetime of knowledge. And the head of the bandits said, what kind of knowledge is it that a man like me can take it away from you? And this, Imam Ghazali says, was a sign from Allah that I need to devote myself even deeper to commit the knowledge, not to my books, but to my mind. And so he becomes even more serious in his learning. He, of course, excels and becomes the brightest pupil of his tiny Nizamiyya, and it's time for him to, so we could almost imagine he's graduated top of the class, he's finished his degree, now it's time to do postgraduate studies, and he goes to the big Nizamiyya in Persia, and the Imam there is a man called Imam al-Juwayni, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, this like the icon of the previous generation, old Sheikh, highly regarded, and Imam Ghazali now enters his class. So he's now, you could almost think like a PhD student, and already now he's in a class of super, high caliber ulama, and his real genius starts to show. The quickness in which he can grasp concepts. He's writing books, he's coming up with new ideas. Imam Juwayni has a famous statement. He says, Ghazali, I'm not yet dead, but you've already buried me. You're already sort of excelling over me, and I'm still alive, dude, slow down. And that is why when Nizam al-Mulk asked al-Juwayni, he asked the head of the Nizamiyya in Persia, look, Persia is already more established than Baghdad. Is there anyone in Persia that we can get to run this university in Baghdad? That's when they said, look, this guy, top of the class, PhD graduate, he's writing books already, he's a master in Shafi fiqh, he's the right man, he's on course to be a judge, a qadi, he's your man. And so Nizam al-Mulk meets al-Ghazali and says, please, you need to be the head of the university in Baghdad. Now this is, at the age of 34, he is the head of the biggest university in the world, and it's the most prestigious job in the most prestigious university in the world. His specialization at this time is really deep Shafi fiqh. In fact, he is regarded as they call him the second Shafi'i. Within the Shafi'i madhab, he understands the madhab in and out, but he is really the expert, I would say, in his field. Even there's no scholar equal to him, is in the field of what we call usulul fiqh, the way in which a judge draws rulings, in which fatwas are given. His book Al-Mustasfa is still studied today. If you go to Islamic University of Medina, you go to Cairo, any university in the world that teaches usul fiqh, Mustasfa is the textbook of that university. Even those who might not agree with Ghazali's theological views, they would agree when it comes to usul fiqh, this was the best. I mean, he was 1,000 years ago. No one has written a better book in usul fiqh. And this is a very, very complicated field of study. This is the area in which judges understand the Sharia, dissect the Sharia. How do we extract laws? How do we develop Islamic law? His book Al-Mustasfa is that book. And as he is now, you could say, a university professor, he has a charisma, his classes are full, people like his personality, he is being consulted on fatwa. We mentioned in a few nights ago that the Amir of the Murabitun, Yusuf bin Tashfin, before he invaded Al-Andalus, he asked Al-Ghazali, give me a fatwa. So rulers are consulting him for his opinion, for his fatwa, and he's writing, he's a prolific writer. But of course, Nizam al-Mulk says, that's great, you keep doing what you're doing, but you need to take on all these heretical views. And so one by one, he's going to, Ghazali says of himself, without any care for myself, I delved into every different group and heresy. I try to master their field, to know what it is that they believe, what it is that they are saying, so that I could counter them. And the first group that he really, and really it's all about, he wants to understand, everyone is showing this is the way to Allah. This is the path of truth. So what is the right way? Is it complete literalism? You take the Quran and you follow the Quran literally without much interpretation? Or is it that you apply philosophy, that your mind is the tool that guides you to Allah? Or is it that we don't have the tools to understand, we need a guide that will take us to the truth? These are the kind of issues that he is grappling with. So the first group that he really takes on, and these are the philosophers. Now it's important for us to understand what is philosophy here. Philosophy at that time encompassed many sciences of today. Ghazali made it very clear. I'm not talking about mathematics. In fact, he liked mathematics. He said, maths is one of the few subjects where the answer is certain. There's no room for debate. 1 + 1 is 2 and that's it, wherever you are. So he loved that. It's certainty. And natural sciences, he says, no problem. But when we take those laws of natural science and Neoplatonism, and we try to implement it in Islamic theology, it becomes a problem. Now, as I said, Islam at that time was the leading civilization. And these highly educated thinkers and philosophers began questioning some of the principles within the Quran. And their view was, listen, Allah wants to explain Himself to you, but He can't explain it because we are all very dumb lay people. And therefore the Quran is put in very simplistic, childlike terms for you people. But for us philosophers, we have mastered the realm of rationality. We have a way of understanding Allah beyond the Quran. Now, this was exciting. And don't we live in a time where people look at secular theories, modern technology, and feel, look, Islam is backwards. These new trends, this is what we should be doing. And so Ghazali really needs to take aim at that. And it's brilliant in the way he sort of not attacks the philosophers, but he dispels them. He first publishes a book called The Aims of the Philosophers. And he uses the language of the philosophers to explain what it is they are saying, what are their objectives. He basically simplifies philosophy for dummies. And the philosophers love this. They say, wow, this is amazing. You're actually doing us a service. Interestingly, this book, which really explains philosophy, would be taken on by Europeans, and from there they would base their Renaissance movement on Ghazali's basics of how you understand philosophy. So the scholars are saying, you are supposed to defend Islam from philosophy. Here you write a book about philosophy and how to understand it. He says, just hold on. Then he brings a second book, The Incoherence of the Philosopher. He said, now that I've shown you, I understand philosophy. I've mastered your language. I'm not going to throw Quran and Hadith at you. I'm going to show you from your principles that your conclusions are wrong. So for example, one of the big debates was that the universe is eternal. There was no scientific way of determining that the universe had a beginning. The philosophers were adamant. The universe must have been eternal because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes are eternal. Ghazali is philosophically proving that the universe was created. We know now scientifically that the universe is indeed created. And this was like a knockout punch for philosophy. I remember Christianity would basically fall to philosophy about a few hundred years later. Islam was saved. This is one of those big steps by Ghazali. The next group that he took on were, as we said, the Ismaili Batini, the people who believed that you cannot understand Islam except through a living Imam. And this is by the Khalifa asked him, he says, Ghazali, I've got a big issue with these Shia groups. You need to write a book. And within he just finishes the one book in January, the refutation of the philosophers, when by June he has to publish his next book on the enormities or the errors of the Batiniyya. And once again, he gives them a knockout blow. Basically, the Batiniyya ceases to exist soon after that, in which he describes their errors, like which Imam should I follow? And then he concludes beautifully. He says, fine, I agree with you. We should follow an infallible Imam, an infallible person who has been guided to the truth. We call him Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So then they say, but the Nabi is dead. So they say, but your Imam is not existent. He's absent. So rather I follow an Imam, I follow a Rasul who I know to be correct, than someone who is absent. So this also kind of ends the Batini. And so he really achieves massive praise. He's more like a celebrity now than a scholar. People are jostling, want his autograph. He's publishing books. His classes are like, as we said, jam-packed. And then he comes to his class one day, is going to give a seminar and he's unable to talk. He completely has a nervous breakdown. He goes through a deep, deep depression. Something hits him. And he writes, and that's what's great about this Ghazali. He keeps writing books. So in this very deep depression, he writes a book. We'll talk about this tomorrow, inshallah, about what he's going through. And he basically asks himself, and this is what he says. He says, I reflected on myself, and I asked, was my intention, all this work and study that I did, was it for public teaching? And was it for Allah's sake, or was I there to humiliate my opponent? Was I there to debate and to be close to the government, and I was going to be this great scholar? Was that my intention? So now he questions his sincerity, and he says, I became certain now that I was on the brink of a crumbling bank, and I was on the verge of falling into Jahannam. I felt like I need to change myself before I'm going to go to Jahannam. So that was his first real crisis was, am I sincere in what I'm doing? I've achieved all this fame, but for what? The second thing, which is a bit deeper, is saying, if you're the master at poking holes in everyone's argument and saying, that's not the truth, that's not the truth, now how do you find the truth? So I can't trust my mind, I can't trust my senses, I can't find a guide, a spiritual guide. How do I find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says, the path that I've been on, I've been teaching Quran and Sunnah my whole life, but I don't feel like it's brought me closer to Allah. How do I get to Allah? And so now he enters a new stage in his life. And we said at this time, Nizam al-Mulk gets assassinated, the Sultan gets assassinated, Ghazali, the greatest scholar in the world, he resigns his job and he almost goes into some kind of self-imposed exile. We'll talk about him tomorrow. But as I said, there's another part of the story we're not done yet. We jump to Europe quickly. We said, while Islam is going through a crisis, Christianity and Europe is on the rise. And the Pope we saw that they conquered half of Muslim Spain, they conquered Islamic Sicily. The time was right for Islam, was there for the taking. And that's when the Pope Urban II called for a mass jihad, in inverted commas, against the infidels, against Muslims, to reclaim the land of Christ. And all over there was this massive euphoria and sincere desire to join this movement, that over 100,000 people sign up for what is called the First Crusade. And they travel from France, Paris. They're going through all of Europe, like a mass jama'ah, going through Europe, on their way to Jerusalem. And they pass the Muslim lands. We won't talk too much of the details. And every time they're confronted by a Muslim army, this group of crusaders defeat them. And with every victory, it feels like Allah is on our side. God is on our side. They start winning incredible victories that really you can't explain how this is possible. They reach, and I'll just end off with this with the one victory. They reach the city of Antioch. Antioch is like the last fortress before Jerusalem. When they get to Antioch is this massive fortress. The Muslims built it, they fortified it. It was described as being impregnable. You can't capture this fortress. The Crusaders get there, they have no siege equipment, they have nothing. So they just trust in their belief in divine will. They besiege it for 8 months. 8 months, this army is standing outside, trying to get into the city. And the scholars write that, if any of the sultans, any one of the rulers, we have so many rulers in the ummah, if any of them sent an army, we would have basically put them, stopped them. But nobody did anything. We just sat there and watched Antioch being besieged. Doesn't that sound familiar? We're just watching a whole 50 countries, a whole 1.5 billion Muslims watching a city being besieged, bombarded, and no one is doing anything. No one's lifting a finger. And so after 8 months of besieging, one Amir says, okay, I'm going to do something. I'm going to send an army. The Crusaders decide, look, we have to either break the siege or leave. Otherwise we're going to be destroyed. And of course, how did they do it? They managed to bribe one of the guards to open the gates, and they enter the city of Antioch. They of course capture the city of Antioch. This was like one of the great victories. In fact, the historians could say it is one of the most interesting sieges in history that shouldn't have succeeded. They enter the city, and now they're in there. When they get inside, they realize there isn't much food left. Now they are being besieged. The Amir reaches the city. The Crusaders are inside. Now they're being the besiegers are being besieged. And they realize, look, we can't last much longer. And while they are there, one of them have a dream that the spear that killed Nabi Isa, according to them, they believe Jesus was crucified and he was stabbed to death. They believe there's the spear under the cathedral. They dig and they find something. Allah Alam what they found. But they believe this is a sign from God that we are on the right. And they go, we're going to have like a suicide march, we're going to open the gates, we're going to charge this Muslim army. They are outnumbered like 10 to 1, and they besiege, and they exit the gates, and they beat the Muslim army. And with that, they are convinced God is on our side, and the next destination is Jerusalem, and they're on their way to conquer Jerusalem. And we'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. Right, so yesterday we asked, in terms of our quiz, who was the Pope that called for the first crusade? His name was Urban II, Pope Urban II. And we have Sister Anisa Ndlau. Sister Anisa? No Sister Anisa's here. Okay. Mishka Roberts. See, now on the radio, everyone knows they're not here. It's a bit awkward now, huh? It's a little awkward. Fatima Sali? Yeah, mashallah. Yeah? Okay. And then Zakaria Adams. MashaAllah. Jazakallah khair. Tonight's question: how old was Al-Ghazali when he was appointed the dean of the Nizamiya in Baghdad? How old was he? It's easy. And then just one announcement, please, inshallah, those who would like to contribute to cooking pots of food and feeding people on Eid, the Mahrajan, please let us know. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.